Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bear Down Ballers right here on the field of 68. I'm Ryan Wall, joined by Jordan Pollock. And Jordan, this is something we've waited since the beginning of the season back in November. We finally have a bracket, and it is just glorious that we finally have it. March Madness is finally here. It kicks off with the first four on Tuesday, and then later this week on Thursday and Friday, we get the first matchups of the season in the round of 64. We're going to get into our brackets, our Sweet 16, Final Four, Elite Eights, everything later. But before we get into that, Jordan, I wanted to just talk a little bit about Arizona's last game since we previously spoke. And Arizona was in the Big 12 championship, their first year in the Big 12. They had two great wins against Kansas, against Texas Tech. They fell 72 to 64 against Houston. But in reality, it wasn't an 8-point game. Arizona had it within three with a few minutes left before the fouling started and all the other stuff. Overall, what'd you think of this game against Houston?
I thought it was a great game. I think I saw a lot of intensity that I think I really haven't seen, especially starting from just that soundbite of Tommy Lloyd like yelling at the guys, get them going to be tough. Like I said, like right now, my new favorite quote is like West Coast soft. Like I've never heard of that, and I just thought that was so funny, and I think so like ideal of what almost Arizona basketball has kind of at least getting the narrative of kind of being over the last few years and even the last few years of the Sean Miller era. I think it was like that was kind of a thing that was kind of becoming. But I thought they played really well. I just think Houston is that great that it was good to see them still be able to compete at a high level against a team that I think is very, very elite and I have going very deep in my bracket.
Yeah, I spoiler as well. I have them going deep in my bracket. This Houston team, we raved about them last week throughout the season. I mean, they're just stone cold, so solid in every single area of the game. The game was really close. Arizona actually had a 5-point lead at halftime, and then the second half is when it got out of hand. It was close in the first few minutes, but then it just seemed like the Splash Brothers of college basketball. I mean, Uzan, Emmanuel Sharp were just on fire to start that half. It seemed like they couldn't miss. I mean, Emmanuel Sharp's range is unlike anyone I've pretty much have seen in a long time in college basketball. That guy just has such a quick release and is just so smooth and calm and confident. And Houston, they're so good, and one of their best players and arguably their leader in LJ Cryer only was held to 9 points, 3 for 10 from shooting, played poorly. Caleb Love was good in this game, had over 10 points in the first half, finished with 19, 7 for 19 from the field. He kind of dipped off at the end of the second half. Jaden Bradley also had 14 points. KJ Lewis, 11 points in this game. And we talk about it all the time. The production outside of those three players, those top three guards on Arizona's team, if it's not high, then this team, their chances of winning and beating not just good teams and not great teams. I want to remind people Arizona didn't just lose to any team, they lost to arguably the number one team in the country. You can very well make that case, and they are my number one team in the country. So they didn't lose to nobody, but Vasar did come on late in this game. But just Vasar and Awaka, their production just wasn't good enough through early in this game and throughout this game to compete with a team like Houston. What other takeaways did you have from this game?
Yeah, I agree. And I think something that I've kind of talked about and we've talked about with the eliteness of Houston and Iowa State in the conference and Tommy even alluded to it a little bit of just later in the game, like Houston was targeting very specific matchups. And it seemed like every possession they were able to get a mismatch with. And one of the bigger ones I noticed was with Awaka. Awaka in a lot of late time possessions was matched up on a guard in either the mid to low posts. And for guys that are skilled enough, that is a very dangerous mismatch. And that's something that I love that Tommy alluded to. He's like, they're just so elite and we have a great team. I love my guys, but we're just in a place where we shouldn't be letting that be a narrative of the game to where mismatches can happen so easily
Yeah.
and basically targeted. And I think that's good to hear Tommy say that, and I'm curious how he'll address that going forward.
Yeah, Arizona, I think, did an incredible job, probably their best job of the entire season, of playing a team as tough as Houston and matching their toughness throughout the first 20 minutes in particular. But it just seemed like they were matching them, but it just seemed like every time Arizona would make a shot, Houston would make a shot. And it just seemed like I've seen Houston do this to so many teams this season is they wear teams down. It's not just about matching their toughness level for 20 minutes. You got to do it for 40 minutes. And this is a Houston team where you have to beat them for 20 for 40 minutes. You got to keep your foot on the gas. And the reality is I mentioned the front court play, but just in general, Arizona, I mentioned Uzan and Sharp and their big shot making ability. Arizona just couldn't match them shot for shot as it got later in the game. It's that simple. Their guys stepped up, and Arizona's top two scorers, Love and Bradley, just weren't on that level. And I think it comes down to Arizona is a big area that they've struggled in this game. They were 5 for 18 from three, only 27%, which is a step down from their last few games. We talked about their improvement there, but it's really just they don't have confident level. They don't have enough confident shooters on the perimeter to go against a team like Houston, and I think that's their downfall.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. And those two guys you bring up, I know noticed one thing is that those guys combined for 6 turnovers, and that was something that even Caleb Love kind of confessed to. He's like, "Yeah, we need to be better down the stretch," and that's the two of us. And he kind of took ownership of that and needing to be better, especially in the crunch time with some of the turnovers that they just some of the boneheaded turnovers that you don't see from older guys. And so it'll be interesting to see how those two guys can kind of shake it off. But I think with that being said, I think to finalize that the end of their first like conference year in the Big 12, I feel a lot better about this team in the different environments, the different ways that this team had to grind and win. I think gamely, and that's just something that they did not get really in the Pac-12 at all. And so I'm very confident right now with this team going forward of just how many different ways and different things that they've had to tinker with this year.
Yeah, 100%. And both of us going into that first matchup in the Big 12 tournament against Kansas, we weren't that high on them. We both expected and predicted Arizona to lose. And yeah, I 100% agree. If I was like here on Arizona, I'm like here on Arizona right now. Their stock increased a ton for me, and I really gained a lot of confidence that although they did win, they only won 2 games in a row in the Big 12 tournament and couldn't win that third in a row. I think they could very well win 3 games in a row when you're playing any other team besides a top 3, 4 team in the country. So I was really impressed with this team. And you mentioned that clip of Tommy and you know kind of getting in the players' faces and his intensity, and I just loved that.
Yep.
Haven't seen a lot of that from Tommy throughout his time in Tucson, but I love coaches that have that relationship with their players where they can really be aggressive and they can get in their faces and that a lot of times motivates the players to go out and take their game to another level. So I really like that. Overall, it didn't seem like Arizona's stock dropped in, you know, the committee's eyes or the country's because if they won or lost that game, they were likely on that 4 seed line, and they ended up getting a 4 seed, Jordan. They're in the East region, which they haven't been in a couple years. They're playing number 13 seeded Akron, the Zips, this year, the champions of the MAC, and they begin their quest to hopefully go to a Final Four this Friday at 7:35 Eastern Time, 4:35 back in Tucson. It's on True TV, and we'll get into that game a little bit later, Jordan. But I wanted to start in the South, all the way up top to the left, and the number 1 seed Auburn Tigers are in that side of the bracket. Michigan State's the 2 seed, and you have Iowa State as the 3 seed, Texas A&M as the 4 seed. I wanted to get just start with our Sweet Six, or before we get into our Sweet 16s and later, do you have any upsets that come to your mind or that you have on your bracket for this South part of the bracket?
Yes. So one thing I'll say, and this kind of actually goes across the entire board. I don't have a 5 seed winning any games this year. I have a 12 seed, and that is also, I think, historically speaking, a pretty like 50-50 matchup. But I'm a lover of all these 12 seeds and the 5 seeds. Pretty much, I'm pretty down on a lot of them. So that's a big upset I have there with UC San Diego beating Michigan. And I also have, I'll preface to say I have 4 of the first 64 games with the higher seed winning. The rest of them I have is all upsets.
Yeah,
So
that's a little more than I would say the
yeah,
norm is. Obviously, it seems like if I had to pick one seeding, but besides like nine versus eights and nine versus eights and seven tens are very popular. People picking the tens every year, but if I had to pick out of the top five, six seeds to lose, I would say the 12 seeds are always that popular
yep,
choice, and it seems like it's a
yep,
popular choice for you as well. Is you're in with it seems like the number just an early poll from what I've seen people on social media and just the college basketball world, it seems like UC San Diego is the popular pick, the
yep,
Tritons right now, over the Michigan Wolverines, who won the Big Ten tournament championship. But in this south part of the bracket, I'll give my Sweet 16 the start. I have Auburn advancing to the Sweet 16. I have Michigan advancing to the Sweet 16. I have Michigan beating UC San Diego. And then one of my big upsets, I have the Yale Bulldogs upsetting the Texas A&M in the first round. So I have Michigan beating them. And then I have UNC winning in the first four and then advancing to the first round and then advancing one step further to the Sweet 16. I know they were a controversial team if they should get in or not. I do think their resume was kind of lackluster, but they're a big brand, so that's why they put them in, I believe. But I still think they have enough talent and firepower. On their best day, I think they can beat some tough teams. So I have them in the Sweet 16. And then my last team in this South region to make it to the Sweet 16, I have Michigan State, and I have it chalk with the top three seeds down there in this region. So yeah, who do you have in the Sweet 16 in the South?
gotcha. I think Auburn is head and shoulders above everybody in this region. So I've
Agree.
got them clean slate to the Sweet 16. And I also have that same upset that you have with Yale beating A&M, and I also have Yale beating UC San Diego. So I have Auburn and Yale, and then the bottom half I've got Ole Miss and New Mexico. I don't. Yeah, I think those bottom two teams, or bottom two games of that region, I don't see the higher seeds winning. There's not enough pop for me, and then from Michigan State, and then Marquette has just not been consistent really at any point this
They
season.
haven't been consistent, but I love to watch Marquette. Cam Jones is one of my favorite players to watch in the
And
country, and I think he gives them like some other teams in the tournament. I think he's one of those guys where if he goes on he if he I think he has a legendary run in him. If he can get that out of him, I think they can go far. But yeah, I had them losing to Michigan State. So do you have so you have Michigan State in the Sweet 16?
I don't. I have them losing the first round to Bryant.
Wow.
Yep,
So that you yeah, so that's a big upset.
that's
So
a major
so
upset.
who do you have in the Sweet 16 in those bottom two spots?
So I've got Ole Miss and New Mexico.
So who do you have winning that matchup, advancing to the Elite Eight?
To the Elite Eight, I've got Ole Miss and Auburn. The Elite Eight.
I have Auburn versus Michigan State, the top two seeds. Unlike last year for me throughout this whole bracket, I know chalk is never a pop or not a popular thing, and a lot of the top seeds do lose here, but I'm actually more confident than I have been in a couple years on the top. I would say two seeds throughout. I just think there are a lot. I just kind of think the top 6, 7 teams in general in college basketball are just a field above everybody. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I think Auburn, Michigan State here would be a fantastic matchup. Obviously, Auburn's lost a couple of games. They lost to Alabama. Obviously, they just lost in the SEC tournament, but I, I like this matchup for them. I think Janai Broome is, I think he was the best player in the country this season, without a doubt. And although Michigan State has been a great team this year, Jace Richardson's been amazing, one of the best guards in the country. I just don't think they have enough. They obviously have an elite coach, but I just don't think their front court is good enough to keep up with Auburn. So I'm going to go with Auburn to the Final Four.
Gotcha. So that matchup, I've got Auburn, Ole Miss, a full SEC, which is a huge storyline, I think, from this tournament. They've completely flipped to a basketball conference, apparently. It just means more in the SEC. Making 14 teams from
Most
the SEC
ever.
in the field is absurd. And so, yeah, I've got a full SEC matchup here with Auburn and Ole Miss, and I just really value, I think, Chris Beard and his experience and what he brings and just the different ways that they can win. And they were in a loaded conference, and they still were managed to play really well. And I don't feel like they have really tons of skill compared to the a lot better elite teams in the SEC. But I do have their road coming to an end at that Elite Eight with Auburn advancing to the Final Four.
So we're in agreement on that. Moving down to the West region. This region has been quickly labeled the region of death. I agree with that sentiment, and it's loaded with Hall of Fame coaches. You have
Yep.
John Calipari, you have Rick Pitino. Um, in this, you have Bill Self as well, and then you have Florida
Hurley?
as the
Is
number
that a Hall
one
of Fame
seed.
coach?
Who?
Is Dan Hurley in that?
Dan Hurley as well. He's another one just going through it. There's so many. This conference is loaded. To see UConn as in this kind of low seeded is kind of weird to me. I mean, I know they've struggled a lot this year, but it's kind of a shame for Florida has been such a great team with Walter Clayton Jr. this year, former Iona player actually. It's just it's crazy they got matched up kind of with that potential matchup. Uh, in the second round there it would be. I actually have that matchup. My Sweet 16 for this, I do one of my upsets, I do have Drake over Missouri in the first round. That's one of my upsets. But for the Sweet 16, I actually have UConn beating Florida. I do. I think Dan Hurley's experience. I know they're two-time defending champions. It's a way different team. They still got Caravan. Liam McNeely, I think, has really been came on strong this year as a freshman. I think I think one of the four seeds are gonna fall short, and I think they're probably, although they arguably ended the year winning the SEC championship the strongest. I just don't. I don't know their experience. I kind of worry about, and so I have UConn beating them, and then I have Maryland playing them in the Sweet 16, and at the bottom I have St. John's, Kansas in the second round, a matchup everybody wants to see. I have St. John's winning that, and I have St. John's versus Texas Tech in the Sweet 16. Who do you got in the Sweet 16 here? And do you have any big upsets in this side of the bracket?
So first round upsets, I've also got Drake upsetting Missouri. I just love what Drake's done, and I feel their head coach is going to get poached very quickly. I think the intensity around him with the Indiana job has seemed to gain a lot more traction in the last few weeks. So I've got them upsetting Missouri, and then, like I said, I got every 12 seed winning. So I've got Colorado State upsetting Memphis. Also, that game is in Denver, which is crazy. So that is definitely something that put me over the edge there. And I also am really I feel really bad for Florida getting UConn in the second round. But with you, I actually have UConn upsetting them. I just love McNeely, and I have a feeling that that man can just take over games with the positional versatility of being so big and such a good ball handler and facilitator. I think he just possesses matchup nightmares for teams, and I just really value, I think, Dan Hurley too, and what he brings to the table. So I've got UConn making a run to the Sweet 16. Um, I haven't been a huge Maryland guy. I know we were talking the other day. You're really big on Maryland. I feel like they've kind of almost coasted in a way through a really good Big Ten. But I think they actually have a really great path to a Sweet 16 and even an Elite Eight. I've got them advancing to the Elite Eight over UConn. And then the bottom of that bracket, very similarly, I've got Texas Tech and St. John's. In that Sweet 16, St. John's beating Kansas right before that. And then I've got St. John's, Maryland, St. John's going to the Final Four.
Wow. Yeah. By the way, we didn't discuss some of these picks because we have some similar ones here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have UConn, Maryland as well. I have Maryland advancing and beating UConn there. I just Derek Queen has just
Yep.
been. I know Cooper Flag. Everyone talks about him and Ace Bally and Dylan Harper, but I mean, I think Derek Queen is the most underrated freshman just because I don't think he's been talked about nearly enough. I think he's one of the best big men in the country. I really, yeah, I really value that along with Julian Reese. I think these two are Twin Towers unit down there in the front court, and I mean they're guards, with Gillespie and Rodney Rice and Julian Reese. I really think these guys are really a lethal starting five, one of the best in the country. So I have Maryland beating St. John's. As much as I like St. John's, I do question them, and yeah, I question their experience on the court. Obviously, not with Rick Pitino. That guy is
Yep.
he's taken six different teams to an NCAA tournament. He just it seems like everywhere he goes in the first 2 to 3 years, he completely turns the program around. And just to see them win the Big East tournament the other night in New York City at the Mecca was just, I mean, one of the best scenes that we've seen this year in college basketball. But yeah, I have Maryland beating St. John's, advancing to the Final Four. I think that yeah, that might be maybe a little too much, but I think Maryland, when they're at their best talent wise, I think Maryland can compete with any team in this, especially in this side of the bracket, even with Florida if they get to that matchup. But yeah, so I have Auburn versus Maryland. You have Auburn versus St. John's. But yeah, Jordan, when we come right back, I want to first get into the Midwest before we get into the East, which is the region that Arizona is in this time around. All right, everybody, we're back. Ryan Walk here, joined by Jordan Pollock. And Jordan, let's move to the Midwest with Houston as the 1 seed in this bracket, Tennessee as the 2, and then you have Kentucky as the 3 here. I'll start off and give my Sweet 16 here. I have Houston taking on Purdue, and I have Illinois taking on Tennessee. And I don't really have the one solo upset I have here, and you have the same one since you already gave it away. You have 4 12 seeds. I have Will Wade advancing, beating
Yep.
Clemson, and McNeese. Yeah, I have them in the second round. Do you have any, besides that one, do you have any other upsets in this? And what's your Sweet 16 looking like here?
I do. This is another bracket where I favor a lot of the lower seeds. I with you. I got McNeese. Living like an hour away from Lake Charles and how much Will Wade has done at that program. I value him and just what he's done. And I think McNeese is just a really good team. I think he's gonna put LSU in a conundrum, I think, right now of maybe thinking about wanting to go back to him. That's how good he's been at McNeese. So I've got them also upsetting Clemson. I've got High Point upsetting Purdue in that first round. So I've got a 12-13 matchup in the second round. And as well, below that, that is my pick for one of the first four making it out. I think Xavier and Sean Miller is my team that I like out of that matchup with Texas. And I like them against Illinois, who's kind of just been either terrible or pretty solid over the last like month and a half. There's really been no in between with Illinois. So I like Xavier there, and I also like Xavier going to the Sweet 16. And this is the big 14 seed that I'm highest on is Troy, and I've got Troy upsetting Kentucky in the first round.
So you got a
So
13, a 12, a 13, and well, you actually have an 11, 12,
11,
13,
12,
and
13, 14.
14.
Yep.
I don't I off the top of my head, I don't know if that's ever happened, but
I don't think it has, but you never know. It's
you never know.
March.
Yes, it
And
is
then,
March. So you have you have an Arizona. On Arizona, you have a Kylan Boswell, former Wildcat, versus Sean Miller, former Wildcat
yep,
coach in the
yep,
second round.
yep. Well, that would be first round because Xavier
Or
would get added
first round. First
before.
round, yes. First round.
But yeah, fun. It would be a funny matchup. And then on the bottom, I've got another upset with Utah State beating UCLA. Not really been high on UCLA. I think they've just kind of had a really tough time in a really hard Big Ten. And I really value, I think, the Mountain West Conference and some of the teams that come out of there. You know, New Mexico. That's one I'm really high on right now with Rich Pitino. And Utah State, they always got shooters, man. So that's one thing I value from them. And then on the bottom, I got Tennessee winning that game. Um, so my Sweet 16. Oh, did I say the top? Top, I got Houston going through. And then Gonzaga, I thought that was a really interesting place to put Gonzaga with just how it seemed forgotten they had been for so much of the season. And then the last month, they go on and they win their conference championship, which it seems like they do every year at that point. So I think that could be a tough matchup for Houston, but I still have Houston beating Gonzaga in that round of 32 going to the Sweet 16. And so I got Houston playing McNeese in that Sweet 16, with Houston advancing to the Elite Eight, and then the bottom side, Tennessee beating Xavier, and then Houston beating Tennessee in the Elite Eight to go to the Final Four from the Midwest.
Yeah, so I have Houston playing Tennessee 1 versus 2 in the Midwest region. I have, like I've said earlier in the show, throughout the weeks leading up to the tournament, Houston's one of my favorite teams in the tournament. I have Houston advancing to the Final Four. So I have Auburn, Maryland, and Houston so far in the Final Four, and you have Auburn, St. John's, and who was that? Who was that last team you had?
Houston, I got Houston
Houston.
beating
So
Tennessee.
so all right, yeah, so we have two
Wow.
of the three same so far in this bracket. But Jordan, let's move on to the region that the Arizona Wildcats are in, and that's the East region. Arizona is out east. But although they're in the East region, they will start in a place that's close to home for many Wildcats, and that is Seattle, Washington, where Tommy Lloyd lived for over 20 years and when he was at Gonzaga, so it should be a strong Wildcat fan base there. So although the East, if they get to the Sweet 16, they'll have to travel a long way. I do like that the first 2 rounds, at least, they will get, they'll get 2 games not too far from Tucson, which is great to see. And as I mentioned, they're playing Akron. It's on Friday at 7:35 on True TV. And yeah, let's start with that matchup, and then we can kind of talk about some of the other things in this region. Arizona versus Akron's an interesting matchup because I said to you this before we started recording today, but Akron only their tallest guy that they play right now in their starting lineup isn't tall. He's only 6'7", and the other 4 guys are 6'3" or smaller. They have a player 5'11" in their starting lineup. But although they're kind of small, this team is a very good team. A lot of good guards, led by Nate Johnson and Tavari Johnson. They are two really good guards. Tavares shooting almost 40% nearly from 3-point range. So a great shooter, great player. What do you think about this matchup? And overall, what do you think when Arizona got this matchup in this region?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's an interesting matchup. Akron, they're led by John Grossi. He was at Illinois right before Akron and was pretty average to say the least. Just a little over 500% winning percentage at Illinois in his 5 to 6 years there. He was always known for wearing like a super bright orange suit. That was one thing I always remembered watching Illinois and Wisconsin games, which is how funny and goofy that was. But yeah, I think this Akron team's pretty good. They've played some good teams. They've played Princeton, lost only by one to them, and then they lost to Yale and St. Mary's. So that they've played teams in the field. And like you said, I think they're pretty much led by their two guards that are in double digits with Nate Johnson and Tavari Johnson, averaging 14 and 13 points per game respectfully. And so I think the biggest thing in this game, I think to my point earlier, is the Big 12 forced them to play in tons of different ways. So this game, I see easily the success on the offensive end is using your height advantage, using the bigs, focusing on Henry Vasar and Trey Townsend. I think this could be another big game for him, which is how much he's able to use his positional versatility with his size. And Henry Vasar, how good of a game can he have? And then on the defensive end, I think they're going to be able to kind of creep more in the corner of we've been talking about how big of a year Caleb Love has had defensively. This is a great game to prove it, and specifically for him, Jaden Bradley and KJ Lewis, and how much they can stop this great duo that Akron has, and
Yeah.
I think it'll be a good game. I think I definitely would put Arizona as a not like a huge favorite, but I don't think it'll be like within two possessions towards the end.
Yeah, because they're 13.5 point favorite right now on the sports books here. But yeah, this matchup is interesting for Arizona, and Arizona, as we know, they're not, free from, losing to, a worse seed. Obviously, 2 years ago as a 2 seed, they lost to 15 seeded Princeton. So Arizona really they can't they can't take this lightly. They can't come out not aggressive. They need to come out with the same firepower that they played with against Houston to beat this Akron team because this is a good mid-major team. They won the MAC. They're 17-1 in the conference. And Jordan, they've only lost one time since the new year, or since January 1st. This team is on a great run. They're well coached. They do have a deep roster of guards, especially. They only have two guys in their rotation that are 6'7" or taller. So yeah, like you said, I agree. They need Arizona should rely early on the front court with Toby Awaka, Henry Vasar, get them in the post, get them cooking, and then kind of give it out to the guards and let them make some magic because this is. I think Arizona, some of the players, especially, a guy like Caleb Love, this is his last time in March. There's no, this is his fifth year. This is his last year. If he wants to make one more impact, this is it. And Jordan, also how these some of these years have ended with Arizona being a top 2 seed the last 3 years. I think there's more, I think more there needs to be a bigger focal point of getting the job done. And I think they just gotta be more aggressive because Tommy Lloyd, although making two Sweet 16s, it hasn't the seasons haven't ended well. They flamed out the teams they should have beaten, teams that were higher ranked than them, and yeah, it's just not. It hasn't ended well, and I think Arizona they need to get to at least another Sweet 16. I think in this region they could get further, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, we both have Arizona winning this one. I think Arizona could win this one by, I'm going to say 8 points if I had to put a number on it. But let's go through some of the other parts of this bracket before we get into Arizona's potential next matchup. And I have Oregon beating Liberty. I know Liberty is a popular team. They seem like they're always a popular team when they're in the NCAA tournament. But we can get into, and I have Duke winning that first matchup, and I have Baylor winning, and I have Duke advancing to the Sweet 16, and I have Arizona versus Oregon, another one of those fantasy matchups between two former Pac-12 rivals against each other. Dana Altman has had a really good year this year in the Big Ten. Oregon's been they've been up and down, but I think when they're at their best, they're a really talented team. Nate Biddle is, I mean, one of the more talented big men in the country. This guy is he's capable of scoring 20, 30 on any night. Jackson Shellstat is a really talented guard. I really like this Oregon team. I just think I have Arizona matched up with them. I just think Arizona has more depth than Oregon. And I think, yeah, I just think Arizona is better on the defensive end, and Oregon, even on offense, has kind of they've scored 50 points, they've scored 80 points, so it's kind of hard to judge with them. But I got Arizona advancing to the Sweet 16 to take on Duke. What do you have there? Who do you have Arizona playing in the second round? And do you think they advance to the Sweet 16?
So my second round matchup is against Liberty, and I think solely it's because of Talon Peter. Mark that name. I think that's a big guy from a lower seed that I think could have a heck of a weekend. The dude averages just under 14 points a game, shoots at least five threes a game, and is at 40. And so,
That's Curry level.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, literally. And so that's a big thing for me. And outside of him, they also still got two other guys averaging double figures. They've beaten McNeese, who is in the field. I value that win a lot. They're in a tournament. They beat them and Kansas State back to back. So high major ball clubs. So it's not like they haven't played anybody, and that's usually one of the bigger, I think, predictors when you look at your lower seeds and trying to pick an upset here or there. You look over their season and see how they've played against higher level teams as well, not just how
Yeah.
they've done in their conference at the mid major, but how they're doing outside of that. So I've got Liberty upsetting Oregon in that first round to fully encapsulate my 12 seed not losing a game in the first round. Then I've got Arizona beating Liberty in that game, and I think it's a very similar, actually dynamic. Akron's not super huge. They've got some undersized forwards that I think Arizona can take advantage of offensively with the big boys. But like I said, their guards are really good, so it'd be another, I think, interesting back to back matchup where I think it would have similar dynamics with those two games with Akron and Liberty. And I've actually got Arizona playing Mississippi State in the Sweet 16. I've we were talking about before. I haven't been high on Duke really much at all this year. Cooper Flagg is an amazing player, number one overall pick in the NBA draft next year. I think depending on the situation, he could be a perennial all-star easily. Um, but there's just a dynamic nowadays in the current landscape of college basketball with the transfer portal having older guys to where freshman led teams haven't really played super well and haven't really won a championship. Like the
100%.
major one I can think of is probably Anthony Davis
Yep.
when he was at Kentucky. And even that tournament run, if you look at it, they dodged a lot of bullets and they played a lot of lower seeds, and better teams that they should have played were upset and they didn't even get a chance. So they had I think always looking back on that run, that was probably one of the more clean runs I've ever seen. And so because of that, I'm not super high on a freshman led team in Duke, and I think they're going to lose in that second round of Mississippi State, and Mississippi State's going to squeak away from Baylor in that first round. So that's what I've got at the top of that, and then the
So who do
bottom.
you wait? No, no. So let's stay up top. So I have Duke versus Arizona. You have Mississippi State versus Arizona. I'll start off with mine. Arizona obviously lost to Duke by 14 points earlier in the season. I filled out my bracket with a healthy Cooper Flag. in their lineup. And I think with a healthy Cooper Flag and Con Knipple, I know when your two best players, especially, are freshmen, like you said, I 100% agree. It just doesn't happen a lot. Teams go far with young players. But I just think this is an exception. Duke's proved it for months on end at this point. I mean, with those two guys, they've virtually been unbeatable. And yeah, I just don't. I think if Cooper Flag, I think the first match, I don't know if he's going to play in their first game. I don't think he needs to, obviously, but I think if he plays in that second game against maybe Mississippi State, if they win, I think that if he's healthy, I just think it's been him and Janai Broom kind of neck and neck for Player of the Year, and yeah, I think he's been that darn good this year as a freshman, and I think that we saw Arizona and Duke earlier this season, and although Arizona's looked better, I think Duke's improved a ton since then. So I just don't have a reason to believe it would be different. I'm not saying like when I had Arizona losing to Kansas last week, I'm not saying Arizona can't beat Duke. They could very well beat Duke. I think this Arizona team, at their best, could make a Final Four. I'm that high on this Arizona team. But when I'm trying to put my bias to the side and be fair down the middle, I got Duke beating Arizona, advancing to the Elite Eight. What do you think? You have Liberty, or not Liberty, you have Mississippi State versus Arizona.
Yeah, I've got Arizona advancing. Mississippi State, another team from the SEC. They've kind of been right in the middle all year in that league. It's been a great league. But I think Arizona, I think, just has the star power, I think, in that game, to go on to the Elite Eight in the East.
Yeah. Well, moving on down, I have Wisconsin taking on Alabama in the Sweet 16. I know a big popular pick has been BYU. Obviously, we've watched BYU closely a couple times this year when they played Arizona. Richie Saunders is a really good player. I don't really trust their depth, although they've been exciting and played really good this year. The team that I do trust more than them is Wisconsin. And although John Tonje was very inconsistent. He was flat out horrible against Michigan in the Big Ten tournament championship. He was only like 1 for 14. I've really grown on this Wisconsin team. I know obviously one of your favorite teams. You're high on them. Uh, but yeah, I think when you have Blackwell and you have Klesman and you have Tanjay and I really like that depth on the wing and their guards, and I think this team's one of Wisconsin's better teams in the last decade. Actually, they've had a lot of good players. I think Tanjay at his best is one of their best players in that time span, and I have Wisconsin versus Alabama, and Alabama has been up and down this year. I just I just Grant Nelson was so good in their run in March last year. I think if he plays at that level, along with Mark Sears and company, I got Bama by slightly winning that game. I think that could be an incredible game, and but I do think Wisconsin has the talent, and when they're at their best, I think they could beat Bama. They could go to a Final Four. But yeah, so I have Duke versus Bama in my Elite Eight. Who do you got coming to the Sweet 16 in that bottom half?
Sweet 16, I got in the bottom half. I've got Wisconsin and Alabama. I'm right there with you. I think the BYU Virginia or Virginia Commonwealth, the VCU matchup, I am not super high on BYU, especially when it gets to tournament. Maybe I'm just using history as my kind of thing, but I'm just not a lover of I think some of the ways that it seems like BYU's had to win some of these bigger games, and I just don't see them being in a situation where they can get essentially in the middle of a controversy in a way of like, okay, like how are they going to figure out to win this one this way? And that's kind of I know been a big thing that I've noticed from them over the last few weeks. So I've got VCU upsetting BYU in that first round, and then I've got Wisconsin beating Montana, and then on the bottom half, and I want to say one thing about St. Mary's. If St. Mary's, if their name was different and their name was Gonzaga, and they played the exact same way they did, they would probably be a top 5 seed because
100%.
because their name is St. Mary's and because they completely dominated their conference and the way they looked, and I know they lost a great game in their tournament, but it's just mind blowing to me that they were punished essentially for dominating in the regular season and then losing a great game in their conference tournament to where Gonzaga, I for pretty much almost the entire year was behind St. Mary's. And I think that was a pretty big travesty for me. I think one of the things that I look at in this bracket, um, and to be on that side of the bracket with Alabama, I think is brutal too. I love Alabama. So I've got those two playing in the round of 32, St. Mary's and Alabama. And my biggest thing with March is the stars. And when you've got teams also that are predicated so much on the 3-point shot, if your 3-point shot is not falling, do you have a guy that can take over? And Alabama does. Alabama has Mark Sears. And that's, I think, my explanation for pushing them all the way to the Sweet 16 and beating St. Mary's is even if they have a bad shooting night, Mark Sears is going to make plays and he's going to put guys in
And he,
positions.
and he has experience. I mean,
Exactly.
Alabama making it far last season, they have that experience. They have a couple core members returning. Who do you got? I think I know who you got, but who do you got between Wisconsin and Alabama?
So Wisconsin, Alabama, a great matchup because Nate Oates is born and raised from Wisconsin. So that's a really cool and funny matchup right there. But I've got Wisconsin in this game. And for the exact reasons that I just said, if your team relies on the 3-point shooting, you need a star to take you over the top. And right now, this season, I think John Tonje is just a little bit ahead of Mark Sears. And yeah, that's I think my defense of them. And I think those two teams are just super high offensive outputting teams. Like that game could easily be in the 80s and 90s. And I would love to see if they shoot well, it could probably get to 100. But
Yes.
I think I think that's probably going to be one of my favorite matchups, and just how much I love Nate Oates and I love Alabama's style and how Wisconsin has completely reinvented their own style and how much up and down they like to get in this year. I think that would be one of my favorite matchups in the entire tournament. But yes,
Yeah.
I do have Wisconsin going on for a rematch with Arizona in the Elite Eight.
Yeah, as good as and much as I love Wisconsin this season, one flaw that they do have is their bench on some games is just they just don't get a lot of production there, and I think when that happens, they could struggle. But yeah, I mean, if you have we've talked about it, it's similar to in Arizona when you have if Tanja's been a better scorer this year than Caleb Love, but if both guys are going to go 1 for 15, you have little chance to win. It's that simple. But yeah, you have that. That's a great matchup in the Elite Eight. I have Duke versus Alabama. I have Duke winning this game. Like I said, I just think Duke's it's not even just their top two players with Kneppel and Cooper Flag. I mean, Tyrese Proctor's came on this season. Caleb Foster, their guards have been good. So I think that's what puts them over the edge. I have Duke. I have my final four set. I have Duke versus Houston, Auburn versus Maryland. Who do you have winning that potential matchup between Wisconsin and Alabama?
So
Not Wisconsin and Alabama. Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, Arizona.
Yeah, Wisconsin, Arizona.
So again, I want to make a contextual preference that I think Wisconsin or Arizona was done very dirty with this matchup because Wisconsin as a three, I think was above Kentucky. And they put Kentucky in the Midwest while putting Wisconsin in the East, which makes no sense at all. And from this, I look at it of like them wanting a possibility for just another matchup like that. And so, isn't it like for Arizona fans? I think that's just really dumb. Like, I don't think there's any reason why Wisconsin should have been playing in Milwaukee this weekend in the Midwest region. That point just doesn't make sense to me. I know Kentucky's had a great year, but I just think the consistency that Wisconsin has had from start to finish and finishing as the Big Ten tournament runner up, I think is huge. And so it's a scary matchup, I think, for a lot of Arizona fans of just seeing Wisconsin, especially in March. But I do have Wisconsin continuing that role and Wisconsin getting to a Final Four and beating Arizona.
Got it. Before we go, let's get into our final four picks. I have Maryland beating Auburn in the semifinals. I have Maryland advancing as a 4 seed to the semifinal. And then I have Duke versus Houston. I have the Houston Cougars beating Duke, and I'll give my national champion right now. I have the Houston Cougars beating Maryland in the national championship. I think Calvin Sampson finally gets it done, finally gets over the hump after a couple deep runs, a Final Four. I think this is the year that they cut down the nets, and I just think Houston, I've been saying it all year, I think Houston's a level above the field, and I think they're going to prove it this tournament. Who do you have winning your Final Four matchups, and who do you have cutting down the nets this year?
Final Four with Auburn coming out of the South and St. John's coming out of the West, I think is a great coaching matchup. Two of the best coaches we have in our sport nowadays with Rick Pitino and Bruce Pearl. But I've got the St. John's Redhawks getting to the national championship and beating Auburn. They just have like fate, destiny, miracle, whatever you want to call it. I'm all in on St. John's. They don't win the way you should win nowadays through analytics, through shooting threes. They just out tough you and they figure out a way to score. Either if that's in the mid range, getting to the basket, or shooting an occasional three. But they're just not what basketball is like moving to.
Yeah.
And I just love the way that they kind of ran through the Big East and what he's done. Patino at that job has just been amazing. And then on the other side, I do have as well Houston advancing to the national championship and beating Wisconsin. I think as good of a offensive team as Wisconsin is, they have not seen a team defensively like Houston and what Kelvin Sampson has built with the Cougs. So I've got Houston and St. John's in the national championship, and I as well have Houston cutting down the banners, Kelvin Sampson winning it, making his big first appearance, and making a claim to be a Hall of Famer and finally putting one in the rafters. And Houston got them winning 78 to 61 or 69 over St. John's.
Yeah, so we have the same national champion in this tournament. This should be a great tournament. I'm really excited for this one. Like I said, the top seeds are all really talented, and then as you go down the seeds, the competition is very tough. But Arizona, as we said, opens up with Akron this Friday night on the East Coast. I can't wait to see it. Arizona is looking to go to their third Sweet 16 in the past 4 years. We'll have you guys covered throughout Arizona's run during March Madness this year. But that's all we have time for today. I'm Ryan Wall. He's Jordan Pollock. And